The dust cloud that followed Thomas Holloway's wagon disappeared over the horizon, leaving Theresa Hammond standing at the crossroads with nothing but a carpet bag and the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest like a stone. She had traveled from Kansas City with promises of marriage ringing in her ears, only to discover that Thomas already had a wife waiting in Carson City. And Theresa was nothing more than a fool who believed in pretty words whispered under moonlight. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly as she stood there in her traveling dress, watching the only familiar thing in this God-forsaken territory vanish into heat waves and broken dreams. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, one hand shading her eyes against the glare. A rider approached from the south, sitting easy in his saddle despite the heat, his hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, she could make out the details. A man perhaps 25 years old, broad-shouldered beneath a dusty blue shirt, with a gun belt worn comfortable at his hip. His horse was a solid bay gelding, well cared for despite the trail dust coating its legs. He pulled up when he saw her standing there alone, his eyes taking in the carpetbag and her too fine dress for these parts. When he pushed his hat back, she saw a face weathered by sun and wind but still young, with eyes the color of sage in spring. A thin scar traced along his jawline, white against tanned skin. "That is a hell of a place to be standing alone," he said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who had grown up with the sound of cattle and endless sky. "You waiting on someone?" "No," Theresa said, surprised by how steady her voice came out. "Not anymore." He nodded as if that told him everything he needed to know. His gaze flickered to the dust trail in the distance, then back to her face. "Which way you headed?" The question should have had an easy answer. She should have said Kansas City, should have asked for directions back to civilization and the life she had left behind. But that life felt as distant as the stars, and the thought of returning to face the pitying looks and whispered gossip made something inside her rebel. She met his eyes, lifting her chin despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Anywhere," she said. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of understanding or maybe respect. He swung down from his saddle with the grace of someone who had been riding since childhood, landing light on his feet. Up close, she could see the dust in his dark hair and the honest concern in his eyes. "Name is Garrett Foster," he said, extending his hand. "I run a small spread about 15 miles west of here, just outside Sloan. It is not much, but there is work if you need it, and my sister Ruth could use the company. She gets lonely out there with just me and the hands." Theresa took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and honest labor. "Theresa Hammond, and I appreciate the offer, but I do not want charity." "Not charity," Garrett said. "Ruth has been after me to find someone to help with the house and the cooking for the men. God knows I cannot keep someone in that position. Last woman quit after 2 weeks, said we were too rough around the edges." A hint of a smile touched his mouth. "If you can cook and do not mind living remote, the job is yours. Pays $30 a month plus room and board." $30 was more than fair for that kind of work, and they both knew it. Theresa felt a surge of gratitude war with her pride. She had some money saved, enough to get by for a while, but eventually she would need work. This offer was better than anything she was likely to find in a town where she knew no one and had no references. "I can cook," she said. "And I am not afraid of hard work, but I need to be clear, Mr. Foster. I just came out of a bad situation with a man who lied to me. I am not looking for anything except honest work." "Understood," Garrett said, his expression serious. "You will have your own room in the main house with a lock on the door. Ruth will be there and the hands have their own bunkhouse. Anyone gives you trouble, you tell me, and it stops." I run a clean operation." The sincerity in his voice decided her. Theresa nodded, picking up her carpet bag. "Then I accept, thank you." Garrett took the bag from her despite her protest, tying it behind his saddle. Then he mounted and extended his hand down to her. "You ever ridden double?" "Once or twice," Theresa admitted. "Then up you come. 15 miles is a fair walk in this heat." She took his hand and let him pull her up behind the saddle. It felt strange and intimate to sit so close to a man she had just met, her arms around his waist for balance, but there was nothing improper in his manner. He kept the horse to an easy walk, mindful of the extra weight and the heat. As they rode, Garrett told her about the ranch. He had inherited it from his father 3 years ago, in the summer of 1875, after a fever had taken both his parents within days of each other. His sister Ruth was 22, 4 years younger than him, and had been keeping house since their mother died. They ran about 200 head of cattle and had 3 ranch hands who had worked for his father before him. "It is not a grand operation," Garrett said, "but it is ours, free and clear. My father paid off the land before he died, which is more than most can say." "It sounds like a good life," Theresa said, and meant it. "It can be," Garrett agreed. "Hard but good. What brought you out to Nevada, if you do not mind my asking?" Theresa hesitated, then decided he deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "A man named Thomas Holloway. He came through Kansas City 6 months ago on business and swept me off my feet. Talked about opportunities in Nevada, about building a life together. I had no family left, my parents both gone, and I believed him. Traveled all the way out here only to find out he already had a wife." She felt Garrett stiffen slightly. "He is the one who left you at the Crossroads?" "Yes. Said he was sorry, that things had gotten complicated and he could not be seen with me. Then he drove off like the devil was chasing him." "Bastard," Garrett said quietly, and the anger in his voice surprised her. "Sorry for the language, but that is a cowardly thing to do to anyone, let alone a woman alone out here. You are lucky it was me who came along and not someone worse." "I know," Theresa said softly. "I was beginning to realize just how much danger I was in." They rode in silence for a while after that, the landscape rolling past in shades of brown and gold. Mountains rose in the distance, purple-blue against the sky. Despite everything, Theresa felt something in her chest begin to ease. Maybe it was the rhythm of the horse beneath them, or the solid warmth of Garrett's back against her arms. Maybe it was simply relief at not being alone anymore. The Foster Ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a collection of buildings clustered around a natural spring that fed a small creek. The main house was adobe with a wooden porch, modest but well-maintained. A barn and several corrals spread out behind it, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. 3 men were working near the barn, and they looked up curiously as Garrett rode in. A woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was pretty in a practical way, with brown hair pulled back in a braid and the same sage-colored eyes as her brother. When she saw Theresa, her whole face lit up. "Garrett Foster, please tell me you finally hired someone," she called out. "Theresa Hammond, meet my sister Ruth," Garrett said, dismounting and then helping Theresa down. "Theresa, Ruth. She is going to help you with the house and the cooking." Ruth came down the steps and took both of Theresa's hands in hers, her smile warm and genuine. "Thank the Lord. I love my brother, but if I have to listen to one more complaint about burned biscuits, I am going to scream. Can you actually cook?" "Yes," Theresa said, finding herself smiling back despite everything. "I promise no burned biscuits. Then you are already my favorite person." Ruth linked her arm through Theresa's. "Come on, let me show you your room and then we can have some tea and you can tell me everything about yourself." As Ruth led her into the house, Theresa glanced back to see Garrett watching them with a satisfied expression. He caught her eye and tipped his hat before heading toward the barn, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she firmly pushed down. She was done with men and their promises. This was just work, just a safe place to figure out what came next. The house was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture that had clearly been built to last. Ruth showed her to a small room off the kitchen that held a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window looked out toward the mountains, and true to Garrett's word, there was a solid lock on the door. "It is not much," Ruth said, "but it is yours. Garrett is particular about privacy. He will not come in here without knocking, and neither will the hands. We have rules about that sort of thing." "It is perfect," Theresa said honestly. After the uncertainty of the Crossroads, this small room felt like sanctuary. They had tea at the kitchen table, and Ruth proved to be easy company, full of stories about ranch life and the occasionally disastrous attempts she and Garrett had made at running the place after their parents died. Theresa found herself laughing at a story about Garrett trying to cook a Christmas dinner and somehow managing to set a pot of beans on fire. "He is good at ranching," Ruth said, her affection for her brother clear in her voice, "but domestic matters are not his strong suit. Our mother used to say he was born knowing how to gentle a horse but could not boil water to save his life." "He seems like a good man," Theresa said carefully. "He is," Ruth agreed. "Probably too good for his own welfare sometimes. He sees someone in need and he has to help. I am glad he found you out there. The Crossroads is no place for anyone to be stranded." That evening, Theresa helped Ruth prepare dinner for the household. The three ranch hands came in at sunset, introducing themselves as Charlie, Tom, and an older man called Dutch who had worked for Garrett's father for 20 years. They were polite and respectful, keeping their eyes on their plates and thanking her for the meal with genuine appreciation. Garrett ate with them, sitting at the head of the table and discussing the next day's work with the men. Theresa watched him without meaning to, noticing the easy authority in his manner and the way the men clearly respected him. He treated them fairly, listening to their input and making decisions without arrogance. When he caught her looking, she quickly turned her attention back to her food, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. After dinner, the hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Ruth went to bed, claiming exhaustion. Theresa was cleaning up in the kitchen when Garrett appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might want this," he said. "First days are always long. Thank you." She took the cup, wrapping her hands around its warmth even though the night was still mild. "Your sister is wonderful, she is," Garrett agreed, leaning against the doorframe. "She has kept this place together more than she knows. I could not have managed without her after our parents died. It must have been hard losing them both so quickly." "It was." His eyes went distant. "One day everything was normal, and a week later I was standing in front of 2 graves trying to figure out how to keep going. Ruth was only 19 and I was barely 22. We grew up fast that summer." Theresa found herself moving closer, drawn by the honest grief in his voice. "I lost my mother when I was 17 and my father 2 years later. I know what it is like to feel adrift." "Is that why you came west? Looking for a new start?" "Something like that. Mostly I was a fool who believed in romance over common sense." She took a sip of coffee, the bitterness matching her mood. "Thomas Holloway told me I was special, that we would build something wonderful together. I should have known better. My mother always said if something seems too good to be true, it probably is." "You are not a fool for believing in good things," Garrett said quietly. "The fault is his for being a liar and a coward." The conviction in his voice made her look up, meeting his eyes in the lamplight. For a moment, Something passed between them, recognition or understanding or maybe just shared loneliness. Then Garrett pushed away from the doorframe, breaking the moment. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow comes early on a ranch." "Garrett," she said, and he paused. "Thank you for everything. You did not have to help me, but you did, and I will not forget that." "Anyone decent would have done the same," he said, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes at her words. "Good night, Theresa." "Good night." The days fell into a rhythm after that. Theresa woke before dawn to start breakfast for the household, worked through the day on various tasks around the house and garden, and helped Ruth prepare the evening meals. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her life in Kansas City had never been. There was something honest about physical labor, about seeing the direct results of your efforts. Ruth became a true friend, the kind of easy companionship Theresa had rarely experienced. They worked side by side, talking about everything and nothing, sharing confidences and dreams. Ruth confided that she had been in love once, with a young man who had wanted to prospect for silver rather than ranch, and she had not been willing to follow him into that uncertainty. He had gone anyway, and she had stayed, and now 3 years later she sometimes wondered if she had made the right choice. "You regret it?" Theresa asked one afternoon as they worked in the garden. "Not really," Ruth said, pulling weeds with determined efficiency. "I loved him, but I love this place too, and Garrett needed me. Maybe that makes me a coward, but I could not leave my brother to manage alone." "That does not make you a coward. That makes you loyal." Ruth smiled at her. "You are good for me, you know." I had forgotten what it was like to have another woman to talk to. All Garrett and the hands want to discuss is cattle and weather. Theresa laughed, sitting back on her heels and wiping sweat from her forehead. In the 6 weeks since she had arrived, her hands had developed calluses, and her skin had browned despite her best efforts with bonnets. She looked different, felt different, as if the woman who had stood at the crossroads was someone from another lifetime. And then there was Garrett. She tried not to think about him more than necessary, but it was difficult when he was there every day, solid and dependable, and unexpectedly kind. She noticed things she had not meant to notice. The way he gentled a skittish horse with patience and soft words, how he always made sure everyone else was served before taking food for himself, the rare but devastating smile that transformed his serious face. He treated her with perfect respect, never crossing any lines, but sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. One evening in late September, a dust storm rolled in just before sunset, turning the sky orange and filling the air with grit. Everyone rushed to secure the animals and close up the buildings. Theresa was helping Ruth shutter the windows when Garrett came running from the barn. "There is a mare about to foal," he called over the rising wind. "I need to stay with her. Ruth, can you manage here?" "We will be fine," Ruth assured him. "Go take care of the horse." He disappeared back into the barn, and Theresa found herself worrying. The storm was getting worse, the wind howling around the corners of the house and rattling the shutters. After they had finished securing everything, she paced the kitchen while Ruth sat calmly mending a shirt. "He will be fine," Ruth said, glancing up at her. "Garrett has dealt with worse than a dust storm." "I know, I just worry." Ruth's expression turned knowing. "You care about him." Theresa froze. "I care about everyone here. You have all been kind to me." "That is not what I meant, and you know it." Ruth set down her mending. "Theresa, it is all right. I have seen the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching." "I do not know what you are talking about," Theresa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Yes, you do." Ruth stood and came to her, taking her hands. "Listen to me. My brother is the best man I know. He is honest and kind and loyal to a fault. And I have not seen him this happy since before our parents died. If you have feelings for him, That is not something to be ashamed of. He is my employer, Theresa protested weakly. And I just came out of a terrible situation with Thomas. I swore I was done with men. Garrett is nothing like Thomas Holloway, Ruth said firmly. Thomas was a liar who used you. Garrett would cut off his own arm before hurting someone he cared about. And employment is just an excuse. If you want him, really want him, then the job does not matter. We will figure it out. Before Theresa could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Garrett stumbled in, covered in dust and grinning. "Healthy colt," he announced. "Both mare and baby are doing fine." "Thank goodness," Ruth said. "Now go wash up before you track that mess through my clean house." He laughed and headed for the washroom, and Theresa found herself following him without conscious decision. She stood in the doorway, watching as he scrubbed his face and arms in the basin. "Garrett," she said, and he turned, water dripping from his hair. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Why did you really stop at the Crossroads that day? Why did you help me?" He went still, his eyes searching her face. "You want the truth?" "Yes." "Because you looked lost and alone and scared, and I could not just ride past that. Because something in your eyes reminded me of how I felt after my parents died, like the ground had dropped out from under you. And because the moment I saw you standing there, something in me knew you were important." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What do you mean, important?" Garrett took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. He smelled like dust and horse and honest sweat, and she found she did not mind at all. "I mean, I have not stopped thinking about you since that day. I know you came here running from a man who hurt you, and I swore I would just give you a safe place and not push for anything more. But Theresa, every morning I wake up grateful that I took that road, that I found you. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I need you to tell me, because this is driving me crazy." She had spent 6 weeks telling herself this was impossible, that she could not trust her judgment about men, that getting involved with Garrett would be a mistake. But standing there with him looking at her like she was something precious and rare, all those arguments crumbled. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, but I do." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "Can I kiss you?" Instead of answering, she closed the last bit of distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning each other. Then Garrett's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. This was nothing like Thomas's practiced kisses. This was real and raw and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "So have I," she admitted. They stood there holding each other, the storm raging outside but everything calm within these walls. Eventually they returned to the kitchen where Ruth was still sitting with her mending, a satisfied smile on her face. "Took you too long enough," she said. Garrett laughed, keeping his arm around Theresa's waist. "Were you planning this? Someone had to. You were both being ridiculous." Ruth stood and kissed them each on the cheek. "I am going to bed now and giving you two some privacy. Try not to burn the house down." After she left, Garrett and Theresa sat at the kitchen table, hands linked, talking deep into the night. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build the herd and maybe one day buy the adjacent property. She told him about her childhood in Kansas City, about her father's bookshop, and how she had loved the smell of paper and ink. They talked about fears and hopes, about the strange paths that had brought them both to this moment. "You ever wonder how different things would be if you had taken a different road that day?" Theresa asked. "All the time," Garrett said, "but I am grateful I took the one I did." You were the best thing I never knew I was looking for." The courtship that followed was simple but profound. Garrett was not a man for grand gestures or flowery speeches, but he showed his love in 100 small ways. He brought her wildflowers from his rides around the property. He fixed the window in her room that stuck without being asked. He listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered more than anything. Theresa found herself falling deeper every day, the careful walls she had built around her heart crumbling. This was what love was supposed to feel like, safe and exciting all at once, steady as bedrock but bright as starlight. Garrett made her laugh with his dry humor and held her when she cried about the past. He never rushed her, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. On a cool October evening, 2 months after they had first kissed, Garrett asked her to ride out with him to watch the sunset. They went up to a high ridge that overlooked the whole ranch, the land spreading out golden and purple in the fading light. He helped her down from the horse and they stood together, his arms around her from behind. "Theresa," he said quietly, "I need to ask you something." She turned in his arms, seeing the nervousness in his eyes. "What is it?" He took a breath, then dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You make everything better just by being here. You make me better. I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to her eyes, but these were tears of joy, not pain. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, a perfect fit. And then he was kissing her, and they were both laughing and crying at the same time. In that moment, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of fire, and the man she loved holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, Theresa knew she was finally home. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Sloan, with Ruth as maid of honor and Dutch standing up for Garrett. The local preacher performed the service in the small church, and half the town turned out to see the rancher marry the mysterious woman he had found at the Crossroads. Theresa wore a dress of cream linen that Ruth had helped her sew, and Garrett wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his eyes bright with happiness. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Garrett kissed her with such tenderness that Theresa heard several women in the congregation sigh. Afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. The hands had decorated the barn with lanterns and wildflowers, and Dutch played fiddle while everyone danced and ate and celebrated. Late in the evening, Garrett pulled Theresa outside for a moment alone. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the darkness. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and held her close. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I have ever been," she said honestly. "Garrett, when I was standing at that crossroads, I thought my life was over. I thought I had made the biggest mistake possible and there was no coming back from it. But then you showed up and everything changed." "We changed each other," he said. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was just going through the motions before you came, working and surviving but not really living. You brought color back into the world." They stood there holding each other, and Theresa sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for dust storms and crossroads, for cowboys who stopped to help strangers, for second chances and new beginnings. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, both of them nervous but sure. Garrett's room, now their room, was lit by candlelight, and he undressed her slowly, kissing each bit of revealed skin like it was sacred. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Theresa's eyes. This was love, real love, not the cheap imitation Thomas had offered. This was partnership and passion and promise all woven together. Afterward, lying in Garrett's arms with her head on his chest, Theresa felt a peace she had never known. His hand stroked through her hair, and she could hear the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he said. "Always." The months that followed were the happiest of Theresa's life. She threw herself into being a rancher's wife, learning the business side of the operation and working alongside Garrett and the hands during busy times. She and Ruth became closer than sisters, running the household together and supporting each other through the challenges of ranch life. In the spring of 1879, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett one evening after dinner, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. His eyes went wide with wonder, and then he was lifting her up and spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to be parents," he said, setting her down gently like she was made of glass. "My God, Theresa, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression made the answer clear. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "You have given me everything I never dared to dream of." Ruth cried happy tears when they told her and immediately started planning, sewing baby clothes and gathering supplies. The hands were equally excited, Dutch going so far as to start carving a cradle in his spare time. The whole ranch seemed to glow with anticipation. The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa struggled with sickness for the first few months, and Garrett hovered like an anxious mother hen, barely letting her do any work. She found it both frustrating and endearing. "I am pregnant, not made of porcelain," she told him one morning when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but what if you strain yourself? What if something happens?" His worry was genuine and touching. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Garrett Foster, women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine. The baby will be fine. You need to trust that." He took a deep breath and nodded. "You are right. I am sorry. I just love you both so much already. The thought of anything going wrong terrifies me." "I know," she said softly. "But fear is not going to help anyone. We have to have faith." As her belly grew round, Theresa found herself marveling at the changes in her body and the life growing inside her. Garrett would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, talking to the baby, telling stories about the ranch, and making promises about all the things they would do together. Those quiet moments filled Theresa's heart to overflowing. On a cold November night, with snow falling outside and the wind howling around the house, Theresa's labor began. Ruth sent one of the hands racing for the midwife in town while she and Garrett helped Theresa through the early contractions. The midwife, a capable older woman named Mrs. Fletcher, arrived within 2 hours and took charge of the situation. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Garrett stayed by Theresa's side the whole time, holding her hand and wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. Ruth was there too, steady and strong, helping Mrs. Fletcher with practiced efficiency. Finally, as dawn light filtered through the windows, their son was born. The baby's first cry filled the room, and Theresa collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket before placing him in Theresa's arms. "He is perfect," Garrett breathed, tears streaming down his face. "Theresa, he is absolutely perfect." The baby was small but healthy, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same sage green as his father's. He had tiny perfect fingers that wrapped around Garrett's thumb when he offered it, and a rosebud mouth that made sucking motions even in sleep. "What should we name him?" Theresa asked, unable to look away from her son's face. "What about James, after my father?" Garrett suggested. "James Hammond Foster." "That is perfect," Theresa agreed, Ruth came to look at her nephew, her own eyes wet with happy tears. "He is beautiful. You both did so well." The days after James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Theresa had never imagined she could feel so much for another person, this fierce, protective love that would make her walk through fire for her child. And watching Garrett with their son was almost more than her heart could take. He was so gentle, so patient, singing lullabies in his rough voice and walking the floor at night when James fussed. "You are a natural," she told him one evening, watching him rock their sleeping son. "I had good parents," Garrett said. "I just try to do what they would have done. And I want to be the kind of father who is present, who shows up. I want James to always know he is loved." "He will," Theresa assured him. "How could he not, with parents like us and an aunt like Ruth? This boy is going to grow up surrounded by love." As winter gave way to spring, and James grew from a tiny baby into a chubby infant with a ready smile, Theresa reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 years. She thought about the woman who had stood at the crossroads, lost and heartbroken, with no idea where to go or what to do. That woman felt like a stranger now. Theresa had found her strength here, found her purpose and her place. She had found real love with a man who valued her as an equal partner, not just a pretty face or a convenient helper. One afternoon in May, she was working in the garden while James played on a blanket nearby, gurgling at the clouds. Garrett came riding in from checking fences, dismounting and coming straight to them. He kissed Theresa thoroughly and then scooped up James, tossing him gently in the air and catching him, making the baby shriek with laughter. "I have news," Garrett said, his excitement clear. "The Crawford place next door is going up for sale. It is a good 200 acres with decent water rights. If we can swing the purchase, we could almost double our grazing land." "Can we afford it?" Theresa asked, always the practical one. "Not quite, but I have been talking to the bank. With the herd doing well and a loan, we could make it work. It would mean tight years, but in the long run it would set us up well, set James up well." He looked at his son with such love and ambition that Theresa felt her chest tighten. "Then let us do it," she said. "We have not gotten this far by playing it safe." They bought the Crawford place that summer, and true to Garrett's prediction, the next few years were tight. They worked harder than ever, expanding the herd and improving the land. Ruth eventually married one of the neighboring ranchers, a good man named Paul Sanders, though she visited often and Theresa missed her constant presence. They hired a young woman from town to help with the house, a shy girl named Emma who adored James and was grateful for the work. James grew into a bright, curious toddler, full of energy and mischief. He was the image of his father, with the same dark hair and steady gaze, but he had Theresa's smile and her stubborn determination. Watching him explore the world filled both his parents with constant delight. When James was 3, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1883, their daughter was born, a tiny girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's green eyes. They named her Sarah Grace Foster, and from the moment James met his sister, he appointed himself her guardian. "My baby," he would say proudly to anyone who visited, standing protectively by her cradle. As the years passed, the ranch prospered. The gamble on the Crawford land paid off, and the Foster operation became one of the most successful in the region. Garrett proved to have his father's head for business and his own gift for innovation, always looking for better ways to manage the herd and improve their stock. But for all their material success, what Theresa treasured most was the life they had built together. The simple joy of family dinners with their children chattering about their day. The quiet evenings sitting on the porch with Garrett, watching the sun set over land they had worked and built together. The laughter and love that filled every corner of their home. Sometimes, usually late at night when she could not sleep, Theresa would think back to that day at the crossroads. She would remember the despair and uncertainty, the feeling of her life falling apart. And she would feel a strange gratitude to Thomas Holloway for his betrayal, because without it, she never would have been standing there when Garrett rode by. She never would have found this life, this love, this family. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked one such night, pulling her closer against him. "Just how lucky I am," she said. "How one moment can change everything. If you had taken a different road that day, or if I had gone back to Kansas City, we would never have met. James and Sarah would not exist. None of this would be real." "But I did take that road," Garrett said, kissing her forehead. "And you did say anywhere, and here we are." "Here we are," she echoed, smiling in the darkness. By the time James was 15 and Sarah was 12. In the year 1891, the Foster Ranch was known throughout Nevada as a model operation. James was already showing his father's skill with horses and cattle, and Sarah had inherited her mother's head for numbers, helping keep the ranch books with impressive accuracy. They were good kids, both of them, raised with love and discipline in equal measure. Ruth and Paul had 3 children of their own, and the families remained close, celebrating holidays and milestones together. Dutch had finally retired, though he still lived in a small cottage on the ranch property and could often be found whittling on the porch or teaching James the finer points of fiddle playing. Emma had married one of the ranch hands, and they had their own small place nearby, still helping out during busy seasons. Theresa was 40 now, her auburn hair shot through with silver, but she had never felt more beautiful or more alive. She had grown into herself over the years, become confident in ways the young woman at the crossroads could never have imagined. She ran the household with efficient grace, helped Garrett with business decisions, and was known throughout the community as someone you could count on in times of trouble. Garrett had aged well too, his dark hair now more gray than not, the lines around his eyes deeper but earned from years of laughter as much as hard work. He still looked at Theresa like she was the most precious thing in the world, still kissed her good morning and good night without fail, still held her hand when they walked together. On their 12th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised her by organizing a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and there was music and dancing just like at their wedding. As they danced together under the stars, Garrett pulled her close. "You remember what I told you the night we got married?" he asked. "About how you saved me as much as I saved you." "I remember," Theresa said. "I want you to know that is even more true now than it was then. Every day with you has been a gift. Every moment we have built together, every challenge we have faced and overcome, has made me more grateful that I found you at those crossroads. You are my partner, my love, my best friend. I could not have asked for a better life than this one we have made together." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he could still move her with his words. "I love you, Garrett Foster. Then, now, always." "Then, now, always," he echoed, and kissed her while their friends and family cheered. As the years continued to pass, they watched their children grow into remarkable adults. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. He married a smart, capable woman named Anne, and they gave Garrett and Theresa their first grandchildren. Sarah went to Teachers College, determined to bring education to the remote communities of Nevada, but she always came home for holidays and visits, filling the house with her bright presence. Ruth and Paul remained close neighbors and dear friends. Dutch passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had helped build. Emma and her husband remained part of the extended ranch family, their children growing up alongside the younger generation of Fosters. Through it all, Garrett and Theresa remained each other's anchor. They weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated good years, and persevered through difficult ones. They grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. The passion of their youth mellowed into something even richer, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared history, and unwavering commitment. On a warm summer evening in 1903, 25 years after they had first met, Theresa and Garrett sat on their porch watching the sun set. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, 4 of them now with another on the way. James and Anne lived in the house that had been built on the Crawford property, running that section of the ranch with skill and dedication. Sarah was visiting with her new husband, a lawyer from Carson City who adored her completely. "We did all right," Garrett said, reaching for Theresa's hand. "We did better than all right," she corrected. "We built something wonderful." "Because you said anywhere," he reminded her, a familiar refrain between them. "You could have said Kansas City or anywhere with a train station, but you said anywhere. You trusted a stranger to take you somewhere you had never been." "Best decision I ever made," Theresa said. "Well, that and saying yes when you proposed." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. One of their grandsons ran up to the porch, breathless with excitement. "Grandma, Grandpa, come see what we found. A lizard by the creek." "We will be right there," Garrett promised, and the boy ran off. Theresa laughed. "Do you remember when James brought you that snake when he was 5? And you screamed so loud half the county heard?" Garrett grinned. "How could I forget?" They stood, joints a bit stiffer than they once were, but still strong, still capable. Garrett helped Theresa down the porch steps with the same gentleness he had always shown, and they walked hand in hand toward their grandchildren's excited voices. As they went, Theresa looked back at the house they had made a home, at the land they had worked and loved, at the family they had created together. She thought about the woman who had stood at the crossroads with a carpet bag and a broken heart, who had said anywhere to a stranger on a horse. That woman had been afraid but brave enough to trust, desperate but hopeful enough to believe in new beginnings. And that hope had been rewarded beyond any dream. Not with ease or perfection, but with real love and honest partnership, with hard work and shared laughter, with children and grandchildren and a legacy that would outlast them both, with a life that mattered, built one day at a time with the man who had stopped at a crossroads and offered a hand to a stranger. "What are you smiling about?" Garrett asked, noticing her expression. "Just thinking how far we have come," Theresa said. "From that day to this one, all the moments in between." "The best journey I ever took," Garrett said, pulling her close for a kiss. "Mine too," she agreed. And as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, one by one like promises being kept, Theresa Hammond Foster knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, not in a place but in a life shared with the man she loved, surrounded by the family they had built and the legacy they would leave behind. The crossroads where she had stood lost and alone was long behind her now, just a memory of where one journey ended and another began. And if she could go back and tell that frightened young woman anything, it would be this: trust the cowboy who stops to help, say anywhere when he asks where you are headed, and hold on tight for the most remarkable journey of your life. Because sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never planned, and sometimes the truest love is found when you are brave enough to step into the unknown. Years later, when Theresa was an old woman sitting by the fire with Garrett's hand still clasped in hers, she would tell her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the story of how they met. About the crossroads and the carpetbag, and the stranger on a horse who changed everything. The children would listen with wide eyes and they would ask, "Were you scared, great-grandma?" And she would answer honestly, "Yes, I was terrified. But I was also brave enough to trust, and that made all the difference." Because in the end, that was what love required. Courage to trust when you had been hurt before, strength to open your heart when it would be easier to keep it closed, faith that somewhere out there was someone worth the risk of believing again. Theresa had found that someone on a dusty Nevada road in 1878, and they had built a lifetime together from that one moment of choice. And if you asked Garrett in his later years what advice he would give to young people, he would say this: always stop to help someone in need, because you never know when that person might become your whole world. And when you find something worth holding on to, you hold on with everything you have and you never let go. They lived long, full lives, Garrett and Theresa Foster, and when they finally passed, it was within months of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, next to Garrett's parents and Old Dutch, in soil they had loved and tended for more than half a century. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore their name and operated according to the principles they had established: hard work, fair dealing, and treating everyone with dignity and respect. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually the doorways to our greatest blessings. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind is just right, people swear they can see two figures walking hand in hand across the land, still together, still in love, still building their anywhere into forever. Because true love does not end when life does. It echoes forward through time in the lives touched and the legacy left behind, in the values passed down and the stories remembered. Theresa Hammond Foster and Garrett James Foster lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. And it all started with a woman dumped at the crossroads, a cowboy who asked which way she was headed, and one word that changed everything: anywhere.